Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Dean Janess. And thank you all for coming this evening. So I'm actually gonna take a turn. We're gonna actually move down in age from Dr. Kaufman's work and talk about children and how best to interview suspected victims of abuse. Now, I want to start with kind of just an overview of what's happened during the past several decades. Literally hundreds of studies have been conducted, testing children's ability to recount prior experiences, their eyewitness capabilities, most noteworthy in the domain of children's suggestibility. Now, the nice thing is I can summarize this entire body of work in one sentence. So the summary is that the results of this work demonstrate quite provocatively that children can be manipulated into making all sorts of errors, including claiming that entirely false events occurred. Now, these errors are tremendously important, and one of the significant impacts of this line of work is really to understand what appears to have happened in some of the most egregious cases of child abuse that we have seen in modern era. And in these cases, scores of children claimed to have been abused, most often at the hands of their daycare providers. Their claims included bizarre, impossible components, and yet no physical evidence was ever uncovered. Now, in essence, what this research has done is this research has demonstrated what's believed to have occurred in these cases, that children can be led to make false allegations of abuse. Now, what I want to talk about today is that false allegations aren't the only type of error that children can make. There's another type of error, and this other type of error is false denials. Now, some of you might be wondering, okay, do false denials really occur? And the answer is that they actually occur far more frequently than false allegations. So let me just give you a couple of examples of how often these false denials of abuse occur. So among children who actually show up at a pediatrician's office and they present with no signs of abuse, they've never reported abuse, no one in their family has, and yet they come in with a sexually transmitted disease. When these children are questioned by their pediatrician, about 57% fail to disclose. So that's an incredibly high percentage of children at that initial interview. My colleagues and I have surveyed hundreds and hundreds of case files of child sex abuse cases in Los Angeles County. All of these cases have been substantiated or deemed true by social services. When you look at these case files, almost a quarter of the children at some point during the investigation deny abuse that they had previously reported. So false denials do in fact represent a significant problem. Now you might be thinking, why would children do this? Well, there's lots of reasons why. So to give you just a couple of examples, when you begin to look at these reasons, really the common core across all these reasons is fear. Children are afraid for themselves. They're afraid for their own safety. They're afraid of what might happen to their family. They're afraid of what might happen to the perpetrator. And so these fears are real to children. And these fears are something that can lead children to fail to report significant experiences in their lives. So you have this problem of false allegations on the one hand and false denials on the other. So what my colleagues and my students and I at UCI have done for the past 15 years is we've taken a different approach to this. And what we've tried to do is, rather than just document that both of these errors can occur, we've been trying to develop different interview strategies and techniques that concurrently increase truly abused children's willingness to disclose abuse. But we've taken that and we want to balance those interview strategies to make sure that those same strategies don't lead to false allegations among non-abused children. So what I want to do today, because I am a scientist, is I want to kind of unpack this for you and show you how we've gone about trying to test some of these strategies, what seems to work and what doesn't. So one of the strategies that we began with was a strategy that many of you may be very familiar with, and namely that's administering the oath. So if you have a child come in and you say to the child, I'm going to ask you some questions, but I want to start out and I want you to promise to tell me the truth. You can get children as young as 3 and 4 to agree to that promise, and then you can go into your interview. So does the oath work? Well, we've administered this in a variety of different studies, and the good news is that, well, sometimes it does. So sometimes it actually does increase children's disclosures of negative events. But there's 2 problems that we found with the oath. Number 1 is if children are afraid to tell, having them promise to tell the truth doesn't overcome that fear. And number 2, which is actually a developmental problem, is that if you're going to administer the oaths, you're going to ask children to promise to tell the truth, children need to understand the obligatory nature of a promise. And if children don't understand that, they may not understand what you intend, what you'd like them to do. So because of these limitations, we turned to another strategy. And this other strategy is, well, we tried, okay, well, if children are afraid to disclose, what if we make sure that interviewers are highly supportive? And so interviews can behave in a really kind, warm manner throughout an interview. And maybe that will alleviate children's fears and get children to disclose. So again, I'm a scientist. I have to kind of even show you data here in a moment. But let me show you how we do this. So what we do is we'll bring children of various ages into our laboratory. And in one such study, we had them engage in a challenging series of activities with one of our research assistants. And then after a delay, we interview children in either a very warm and supportive manner, the interviewer smiles, maintains eye contact, or we have them interviewed by a cold and intimidating interviewer. And at the risk of offending people, our lab kind of calls these the social work interview versus the police interrogation. So we have children interviewed in one of these 2 manners. And then what we do is we look at, well, how much do children say and how accurate is the information that they report? Because they were in our lab, we know exactly what happened, so we can verify what they say. So let me just first say that, well, the supportive interviewing, it did not increase how much children said. So when we think about disclosure, we think about getting children to say more, doesn't look like it's that effective. However, supportive interviewing does have some benefits. And one of the benefits is that it actually increased children's accuracy. So it didn't get them to say more, but it did get them to be more accurate when they did report information. So again, here's my data. Scientists like this. They like graphs with bars. So what you can see is you can see our supportive interviewers. Children are providing almost twice as many correct responses than when the interviewer is non-supportive. So supportive interviewing, it's not a bad thing. We're not going to recommend to be serious. However, when we step back and we think about this challenge of false denials, doesn't look like supportive interviewing is the best approach that we can use. So the third strategy that I'm going to tell you about is what we're calling the putative confession. So the way that this putative confession works is when children are interviewed, we begin the interview by saying to the children, the suspect, we already talked to him, and he already told us everything, and he wants you to tell the truth. We say, so tell us what happened. Now, when you begin a study, when you use this type of strategy, it's really an interesting approach because first of all, because you're telling children that this suspect already told, what you're doing is you're directly addressing children's fears about telling. In addition, the suspect wants children to tell the truth. We didn't ask children to promise to tell the truth, and yet we're giving them this motivation. And third, because we don't tell children explicitly what the suspect said, it's non-leading. And so the meaning of this statement differs depending on what happened to children. So it's a legally permissible, non-leading way of motivating children to disclose. So here it is. So it's overcoming children's fears, it's motivating, and it's non-leading. So how do we go about testing this particular strategy? So again, we bring children into our laboratory and we have them play with a Confederate. Now, for some of the children, while they're playing, this is kind of the beauty of bringing children into your lab, while they're playing, toys break. And this Confederate says to his children, like, ooh, we probably shouldn't have played with those toys. And you know what? Can you not tell anybody that this happened? We don't want to get in trouble. So we're inducing children into secrecy. Now, for other children, what happens is they come in and they play with the same Confederate, but none of the toys break. Now, for some of those children, when no toys break, and I'll go back to this in a moment, sometimes we actually have their parents afterward suggest to the children that they know some of the toys broke. Then what we do, we interview all children, and right before the interview, we vary whether we tell the children, you know, that guy you played with, well, he already said what happened, and he wants you to tell the truth, or not. So when you think about our goal of reducing false denials, but also not increasing false allegations, here's what our data show. So this first graph I'll show you is kind of getting at this main issue of reducing false denials. So these are children for whom the toys really broke. What happened when we administered those instructions? I'm thrilled to say they work, they rock. So when you look at this, so the blue bar is your putative confession, and this is the percentage of children who disclosed that the toys broke. And if you look at this, I mean, we doubled the number of children who disclosed this true breakage, so to speak. So in terms of at least our first goal, these type of data really show that yes, this type of putative confession instructions can be a really effective way of increasing disclosures. Okay. But remember, we also have to balance this false report issue. So now what I want to do is I want to show you the percentage of children who falsely reported that the toys broke. And I'm going to show you first before the children who are not given any suggestions. The graph is actually correct because when you don't give children any false suggestions, children don't falsely claim they broke things. Go home, try to convince your children that they broke something. You can ask direct questions, you can even try to mislead them. They do not falsely disclose that they broke something, at least in these types of settings. So, but that's before, these are the children whose parents didn't say anything. What about those children whose parents said to them, kind of before they went into this interview, we know the toys broke, it's okay. Here's the data on the false reports. Now, we did get some. 4% of our sample did falsely report that toys were broken. However, what I want to bring your attention to is that the putative confession, this interview strategy, was no more likely to induce a false report than the control instructions. So when you pitch this strategy and you argue that this strategy works, it really does look like it might be a really effective way of increasing children's disclosures without affecting false reports. So to kind of just summarize these types of strategies and where we've really tried to go is supportive interviewing. I mean, certainly it can be beneficial in terms of reducing children's errors, but not necessarily in terms of increasing children's disclosures. Now, this putative confession is really, what it does appear is that it might be a really promising way of increasing true disclosures without affecting false reports. So people always ask me when I show these types of slides, they say, what, do you want to go, make these types of instructions mandatory at the beginning of all interviews? And absolutely not. These types of instructions may be beneficial for certain children for whom the suspect is known, the suspect has already been questioned, and for whom reluctance might be a problem. And so what we're now doing in our lab as we expand and continue to test these procedures is we're really trying to determine precisely when a strategy like putative confession might be especially beneficial. And really to kind of step back and to think, more broadly, one of the benefits of this type of work and kind of showing you systematically how we do this is really to show the benefits of science, about how we can take scientific research, take it into a laboratory, and systematically manipulate different types of interview protocols. And if we can do this, what we're hoping we can be able to do is really find the best ways to interview children, to identify those children who have been abused in a way that doesn't lead to false reports. And if we can do this, we really can benefit children, families, and our community. Thank you.